Thanks everyone for joining in for the career panel, opportunities in startup. We have a very exciting panel with a distinguished set of panelists. So happy Independence Day once again, and thanks for joining for this panel. Let me introduce Vijay Gabale, who will be the moderator for this particular panel. Vijay is co-founder, CTO, and CPO at Infilect, which is a retail visual intelligence platform. And before this, he was at IBM Research, where I had the good fortune of overlapping with him. So he's thanks Vijay for accepting this invitation to moderate this panel. So off to you.
Thank you, Devdut, and thank you all for tuning in. First of all, happy Independence Day to all of you. In this session, we are going to talk
Vijay,
about.
we can't hear you.
Okay, just 1 minute. But you can't hear me.
I can actually hear Vijay fairly well.
Can you hear me, Zainul, Kuldeep, Koda?
I can hear you, Vijay. Yeah.
Okay. Did you miss the first part, or
We can't hear you still. I'm not sure whether others can.
I can. We can.
Yeah, I can hear Vijay.
Okay, let me just help out Devdut with the chat. Just
Oh, acha. Devdut is not able to hear any of us, I think. Then.
Right. Yeah, I think let me just go ahead. Let me just see chat window. Panelists and attendees. Yeah, okay. I think let's just go ahead. Okay, so in this panel, we are going to talk about career opportunities in startups. So let's begin. Let me just put it to slideshow. So as all of you might know, India is the third largest startup ecosystem in the world. We have more than 60 companies who have been valued at more than $1 billion. And that number is going to reach more than 150 to 200 in next 3 years to 5 years. And there is a reason for this growth. Most of these companies are homegrown B2C and B2B AI first companies. I mean, you take example of Swiggy, Ola, ShareChat. All of these companies have built their AI teams from ground ups, pretty much from India, right? And the climate for investment has never been better. There are a lot of AI specific investment firms, for example, Pi Ventures, Inflexer, or Mela Ventures, right? And government as well as NASSCOM bodies have been encouraging a lot of AI first work. I mean, government has pulled together a different initiative for this, and NASSCOM also has Deep Tech Club, which basically helps early stage AI startups to grow. But to achieve this vision of enabling 150 plus unicorns through AI first work, we still have a lot of challenges to overcome, right? Firstly, the AI talent is rare. I mean, sometimes it is too academic. The early stage engineers are not skilled enough, and there is in general lack of engineering acumen, right? And we know that because of the sheer size of India, there is a lot of data, but I think there are not many meaningful open large scale data sets using which you can build AI models. And many times it just takes a long time to put AI models into production, where you have to improve accuracy to be more than 95%. So how do we overcome all of these challenges and enable our vision of enabling more than 150 plus companies to scale in India, right? So in this panel, we are going to talk about these challenges. This particular panel is especially useful if you are a student or you are a professional who wants to be an AI engineer or data engineer. And we hope that there are also a few takeaways for teachers and professors to understand the needs of startups and industry. And just for the sake of this particular panel, we are going to define startups into three different phases: early stage companies, companies which have found PMF and who are scaling, and companies who are already at growth stage, right? For example, Ola, Swiggy, or ShareChat, right? So all of these companies form in the gamut of startups from India. And to talk about these challenges, we have pretty accomplished panel. We have Zainul, who is co-founder and CTO of Cog Health, a medtech company, a successful company applying AI at scale. Prior to that, he was at IBM Research Labs. We have Goda, who is AVP of AI at Swiggy, and she also has a vast experience working with companies like Ola. And we have Kuldeep, who is director of AI at SHL, which is recently acquired by Aspiring Minds, and he too has good experience working with startups, right? So all of these panelists will help us decode how to overcome those challenges and then enable a vibrant AI first ecosystem in the country. So the format of this panel is each of these panelists will share their views on how to tackle the challenges that we just talked about. There are already a few questions submitted by you, which I will ask them, and then you can feel free to type in your questions as a part of the live chat. So without much delay, let me invite Zainul first to share his views on why or why not to work for startups, large scale data sets, and what exactly goes on inside startups. Zainul?
Hi, Vijay, and thank you. Welcome to this panel. Lovely to be here on this Sunday morning. So I'll go through the questions a little bit, a little bit in an open-ended fashion. Why or why not work for startups? Now, I think when you want to compare this, I think you're trying to compare not just the three categories of startups that Vijay talked about, but also compared to maybe some of the large corporate entities, like for example IBM, that Vijay and I were both fortunate to be part of, right? So I think one of the key elements that you will have when you're working for a startup is that you will be very close to a customer. You are usually part of a fairly integrated vertical stack, all the way from the data science all the way to the product offering that a customer has. In a lot of cases, the data engineers will actually present to the customers sometimes and get feedback. So I think one of the key advantages of being in a startup is that you will be really close to the customer. You will hear from the customer firsthand their problems. A lot of times, what I found is that as data engineers, we try to solve a problem that we think is important, and I think being close to the customer is very important, so that you know what problems they care about, right? I think that's one thing. That's on the startup side. On the corporate side, I think the key element that I think being part of a corporate gives you is brand, and brand comes with a lot of perks. One of the biggest perks that brand gives you is access to larger data sets. Being able to be part of a large corporate means that you'll have great data handling capabilities, you'll have great data security capabilities, you'll probably be ISO 27001, all of the information security. So large organizations will usually not have a problem sharing larger data sets. I'm talking about customers sharing large data sets with you as a part of solving their problem. Whereas with a startup, sometimes they'll have this issue that, oh goodness, do I really trust? There's so much data leaks and all kinds of things happen. So I think that's the other side. I'll let the other panelists go through other, other parts of this. I'll keep this short. In terms of the large-scale data sets, I think that really depends on the kind of startup you are. I know that a lot of the B2C startups, who are direct to customer as well, they actually have a lot of data because they're working directly to customers at the millions, at the tens of millions, and sometimes at the hundreds of millions of customers at scale. So I don't believe that even in these large organizations there's a dearth of data. However, what I do know is that at least for us, the data, there's a lot of skew in the data. As Vijay said, meaningful data sets is very hard to come by. And the skew is natural in the real world. There will be a lot of data, that has some patterns, and then there'll be those rare cases that actually will want to take you from the 92% to the 95%, and you just can't get that because you don't have that richness of data. And so while we have large-scale data sets, I think it is always hard to get meaningful data that takes you, just that one notch up, and maybe create a differentiator in the market vis-a-vis your competitors, vis-a-vis what the alternatives are. The large-scale data sets are there, and they are growing, especially as the company grows, your customer base grows, your revenue grows. You will naturally have larger data sets. The last question on AI research, AI R&D. I think this is very very much aligned to the founder's own vision of the company, and whether they are most. And so in some cases, it's turned out that you will do some research and some applied research, and some engineering, right? So there's a research, there's a development, and there's an engineering, R&D and E. And at different stages of the company, you will have different organizations. And I think at early stages, you'll typically stay, little bit of research that you probably come up with an aha idea. Hey, this is something I can do. And then you'll take it out to customers. You will try to get, some validation, some product market fit. And then it's actually much later when you're Series B and beyond that you'll create a research unit within your organization where you'll tackle more blue sky type research. Right. Vijay, back to you.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you very much for Zainul. I think that was quite a comprehensive view of what goes on behind the scenes. I would like to request Goda to share her views on what has been her experience, working across Ola as well as Swiggy. Goda?
Right. I think Zainul covered, in such a comprehensive view of this. Just minor parts to add here. So why work or not work for startups? I think the key area where an AI engineer or a data scientist can play a role more than the model building itself is the translation of the, what is important as a business problem to a data science problem, right? Because models, tools all exist, but if the translation and that matching is not right, you cannot. So when you're in a startup, you get that opportunity to do that translation, being very close to the business, very close to the founders as to what they are solving. So that's a key opportunity to build that, which is an important skill set. And the second part is also a lot of softer skills are required to make you successful in this field, where it's not only knowing the rigor and the theory behind, why a model is working, but to be able to explain it well. And given the speed at which startups need to work, that getting that buy-in is the softer skill that you get to build when you're at a startup, right? But with respect to the data sets itself, the whether you have good data sets or not depends a lot on the data strategy of the startup, right? In the sense, from day one, are you thinking of what data needs to solve for you and collecting all the required data right through your PMF stage is what will enable you or disable you in a manner from a accessibility to data sets perspective. And hence that also kind of answers the third part that you mentioned, that especially till you reach the growth stage, in the first two stages, key is to solve the problem at hand and keep that momentum going. So you will do whatever it takes to solve the problem. If it needs research, yes, research. If it needs, more engineering, yes, more engineering. So you also get to wear different hats as part of that. Yeah, so I think that answers most of the questions here.
Yeah, I mean, I can't agree more being a startup founder that having full stack AI engineers as a part of your team can create, wonders for you, especially at, early stages. Typically at, early stages, full stack AI engineers can build the whole, system for you. And as you grow, you can do a bit of, research to improve, accuracy of your AI systems and other aspects. And once you scale, at that point, all of interesting experiments, such as if I put, model A versus, model B into production, what kind of impact it can have on your, business. All of these aspects, start becoming interesting. So let me also try to bring in Kuldeep, and let's, hear from him as to, his experience in, working across, startups as well as now as a part of a big org.
Yeah, thanks, Vijay, and very, very happy to be here. So I think it's good that most of my thoughts are aligned with what Janul and Goda brought out, and but I will try and see whether I can fill in some gaps or maybe get to the second order of thinking on some of these ideas. So I think, and most of my ideas will be biased towards a pre-PMF, pre-product market fit kind of company, because I have been part of that. I have been transitioned from this research lab to a early stage startup, played with the product for a while, right? So one thing that I found quite useful in early stage startup is that it gives you a front seat of the business, right? You are all there when we are doing product iterations, right? So any data scientists, any data engineers who is working on the product, they are with us, right? Even when we are iterating on the product. So they get a front seat view of that, right? And I agree with Janul when he says cross collaboration, right? A data scientist or a data engineer in an early stage startup or a late stage startup also has a very frontal view of a customer requirement, right? There's no middlemen, no translators. So they really have to build that problem solving mindset of taking a customer problem and then thinking through a solution in that, right? So that's kind of what very much aligned with what Goda has said, right? So I think, and problem solving mindset is going to be very, very useful no matter you work for a startup later, or you do your own startup, or you work for a big company like even research labs, or even a late stage startup like Swiggy or Ola. So this is something that is, I think, if you join a startup in first few years of your career, that will develop you for a very, very great growth in coming years. Now, I would like to touch, I think, one point which is like why you should not join a startup, right? What does it take, right? So you should not do it, or I mean, it's more of a prescription, not a prescription, but just a thoughts, right? So I think if you need a little bit of stability and you can't work around uncertainties, so to do your job effectively, you need that mental peace. You don't want to change, let's say, your problem every 1 month, because in a pre-PMF startup, you are doing experiment with a couple of things, and some may work out, some may not work out. So you have to change things very quickly, right? So if you are that kind of person who can't withstand uncertainties, I think you should try and avoid that. Also, there's no well-defined work in a especially early startup, right? Like startups like Ola or Swiggy will have a very, very well-defined work because they have found a product market fit, they know what to do, and then they have to just execute it. They discover new problems and then try to solve them, right? But for early stage startup, even Series A startups might not have well-defined work, which also gives you an opportunity to build a problem-solving mindset, because then you are thrown to that problem and you have to think about solutions. So with respect to data sets, I don't think that, yes, there are certain domains in startups which are kind of disadvantageous, like Janul mentioned, like healthcare is a sensitive area for building data sets, right? So all these data is with hospitals, they don't want to share with some early stage companies. Similarly, there could be other areas like insurance, but but some other like retail or ad tech is a little bit easier, right? Because customers may be still more open than healthcare to share data sets, as well as you have other billions of images, billions of videos lying around on YouTube and Instagram and wherever, right? So it depends on domain, and given that a lot of startups are getting funded, so they have good enough budget to also get their own data set labeled, which also gives you an opportunity to scope the data set. And with a recent movement around data-centric learning, right, which we have, like a lot of people have discovered it earlier, but now there's a bigger movement around data-centric AI, right? Like how do you design your data to make sure, and there's less, with a lesser focus on the models as such, right? So that is also an interesting area to look into it. With respect to AI research or AI engineering, I think I kind of 100% agree with what Vijay and Goda was discussing about. You really need to be full stack. I mean, there is no, it's very hard to define boundaries in a startup, right? You have to do pretty much everything every day, what takes the business to the next level next day, right? It just, and I think if you join a startup and you, especially early stage startup or a series A, series B startup, be ready to work on some of the AI ops, right? Model deployment, model maintenance, building REST APIs on that model, or doing some cool visualization which you can showcase to the customer. So that is kind of expected work that we have there. So I will just stop here and see if there are any questions.
Great. Yeah. Thanks for your thoughts, Kuldeep, Zaidul, as well as Goda. Just to share a couple of anecdotes that I have seen, running a startup as well as being part of IBM Research Labs, is that especially if you are joining a startup, look for whether the startup has a data loop to collect data as a part of their products. For example, if you think about Swiggy, right? So because all of us perhaps order using Swiggy as an app, right? It inherently generates a lot of data for the AI team to build a lot of AI models, right? And if you're joining a startup, let's say, which has mobile applications or some way in which they can collect data from the ground, I think it is going to create a lot of large scale data sets, right? The other thing that you should look for is whether the startup works with either internal teams or external teams to get that data labeled, because just having this data is not going to be sufficient. You also have to ask the founders or the early stage employees whether there is a system or workflow to get a lot of data tagged, because unless you have a lot of labeled data sets, you're not going to get opportunities to build AI that works in practice, right? And I think I can't agree more with Kuldeep, especially when it comes to pre PMF startups, right? um, the work is more in terms of how do you push data so that the AI model talks, right? I mean, how do you wrangle data? How do you augment data? How do you build large scale in data sets so that even primary techniques work, right? And they give you AI models which can work with very high accuracy. And as Zainul mentioned, you could talk to the customer and then say that, look, we have built AI system which can now work with very high accuracy. Does that solve your problem, right? I think these two are important aspects of being part of an early stage company, right? So I think we can take the discussion forward, and given we are talking about career opportunities in startups, and as we have discussed, startups could come pre-PMF, PMF, as well as scaling. And I think we have a panel which has seen the entire journey. So let me start with Goda and ask her, with respect to her experience, what kind of composition of the team that she has seen across Swiggy, Ola, or other companies, right? Because the minute you join a big company, there are not just AI engineers, you also have data engineers, engineers which can put AI models into practice. So, just wanted to understand what kind of, opportunities exist if you have to join a company which is at scale.
Got it. Just because we were talking about the full stack, right? So I would like to break that up into, different roles that are part of that full stack, right? So the very first part of the journey is where, the raw data that's just coming in from various sources is kind of, flowing through, getting stored in the right form and processed enough to kind of expose it in a AI ready format in some way, if we can call it. So most of that work is owned by what we call as like data platform teams consisting of data engineers whose key skill set comes from having the right choice, because there are plethora of options available for each step that you could, like what kind of streaming processing you need to use, what kind of data stores. So people who can make that judgment call based on the need of the business and kind of build up this, the data warehouse and expose this to all the consumers of that information in a way is what consists of data engineering and data platform teams. Then the middle part of, using that data to enable good decisions for the organization. Now, good decisions could be enabled where you're enabling teams to make those decisions by exposing data in the right form, which a lot of analytics teams do. And there are also things where you need to enable machines to make those decisions, which means a lot of ML engineering comes into play where you're building models and deploying those mostly in real-time situations where you have to have those predictions served in real time. So that's where the ML engineering part of it and ML platform teams come into play, right? So broadly, these three roles is what I've seen as, forming this composition. And in terms of the problems faced, it's because all these skill sets being in the same person and having all the knowledge is rare to find. So there are a lot of gaps that you need to fill with understanding each other's roles. So for person in one role, the other role, what is done there could be a black box. It's about enabling, how you can make that box more transparent so that each other's role and you kind of agree on a contract and kind of work on these transitions is what will make it more smoother in terms of deployment, maintenance. Right, but definitely it's a journey of discovering problems and working to figure out what to do next time so that it does not happen. With respect to the last one you mentioned here, what are you kind of expecting there when you mention new frontiers?
No, I think my question was more for the first bullet where we are talking about how do you structure AI team, and I think you did mention that there are data teams. Then there are teams who can derive, who can build AI, models on the top of this data, and there are teams who can perhaps build, business intelligence or analytics using, AI models, right? I think these are the three broad.
No, and the ML platforms to enable the deployment and serving of these models.
Essentially tools, basically tools, by which you can deploy all of these AI models into practice. Understand. Zaidul, given that you have scaled a TriCog from 0 to 1, what has been your experience during that, scaling? Because if you work with the big org, I think pretty much all of these 4 teams are, structured. But as you are growing your team, you have to do both the things at the same time. Form, sub teams as well as grow them. So yeah.
Right. So I think what Goda said was very accurate in what we call the production stack, right? So the production stack is the customer facing stack, right? And obviously, the customer facing stack, there's a lot of constraints that are there. So the ML platform teams, the DevOps teams, the AI ops teams, whatever we like to call them, we don't actually have an AI ops role in the company yet at this stage. But now that I hear about this term more often, it does make sense, right? So from a career opportunity roles perspective, I'd like to think about, or I'd like you all to think about different stages in the ML workflow in any of these companies. So there'll be one production workflow, which will be like the ironclad workflow that people touch, but they touch with a lot of care. And you'll have a lot of these structures within your production workflow, where you have different roles for different people. And then just before the production workflow is what you will have, maybe the the pipeline or the development workflow, which is stuff that or you believe should go into production, but hasn't made it there yet, right? And there, the roles are a little more fluid. You are probably not expected to know how this model that you're building will scale to millions or tens of millions of users. You're not expected to have it run in real time. You're not expected to have a lot of the the idiosyncrasies that have to happen in the production side. Information security is, you don't need to have all of that, but you definitely need to have a lot more model building, data extraction, data wrangling, a lot of this intermediate stuff where it's getting there. You've got good accuracy, you've gotten the accuracy well enough that you think you can get it to production. And the roles there are more towards the data science, and then I will call it the data engineering side, and less towards the ops side, right? And then there's one stage even before that, which I will just call open-ended research, where I think the two things that you really need is great data extraction and visualization skills, because you really don't know what the data is telling you today, right? In fact, you may not even know what problem you're solving. You're probably looking at that data fresh, looking at insights from the data just to be able to understand, hey, are there patterns here? We have some intuition on the patterns. Is the data confirming those, in some of that intuition, right? And so, of course, model building everywhere, but then data visualization, data extraction, be great at SQL queries, be great at managing large, Mongo databases, whatever, however your data stores are, S3s and whatever, you have a lot of different ways of collecting that data, and different companies have different data storage strategies as well. In our case, for example, we are healthcare, so we have to be even more to data sharing. Even within the company, we have only a few people who can actually access the data. So you need to be able to reach out to the right people as well. So soft skills very important here, as Goda said, right? But I think depending on what part of the company you end up in, and sometimes you'll be part of all three. You'll end up doing different things at different times. If you have the skills that go all the way from the bottom to the top, that's fantastic. But someone will fit you in at the right spot.
Right. Understand. And I mean, I just like to ask a follow-up question where you have developed all the AI models, you have shown that they work with great accuracy, you have showed demos, POCs to the customer, and now you have put your AI models into production. How do you know whether that model is still performing at the same levels of accuracy or not, right? And I'm sure three of you would have faced the same problem, right? Could you talk to us about some of those experiences? Because we know that data drift is a real problem. You will have to continuously train the AI models. But if you could share some anecdotes, some examples where you encountered that problem and how you solved it, it would really help. First, Zaidul, and then perhaps Kuldeep, you could share your thoughts.
Okay. So I have to go a little bit into the background of the company that I work with, which is Cog Health. So Cog is, we provide diagnosis, healthcare diagnosis to doctors. So we are a B2B that provides diagnosis to doctors in clinics, hospitals, and diagnostic labs. And the way we do it is that we have an AI model that takes in the data, that actually comes up with a preliminary diagnosis, and then we get it overread by our own internal team of doctors. Okay, so we actually have, in some sense, our data strategy and annotation strategy are combined into one. And in a way, our service is always corrected by our internal doctor team before it goes out, right? So the interesting aspect of that is that we have the ability to correct a lot of what the models are doing, potentially in real time. Of course, we can't do it in real time, but very regularly that can happen, right? So the interesting anecdote actually is that of automation bias, because the algo doctors, as the algo is getting better, the doctors are trusting it more. And I'm talking about our internal doctors, right? And as the doctors trust it more, the mistakes that the algo makes are now much harder to catch.
Interesting.
Right.
Interesting.
And that's something that we have to always be very careful about, in terms of this drift that is happening. We don't see that much in terms of drift per se, because our data the data, as I said, is skewed, but the data distribution has remained fairly consistent over time, over many years now. But I think what's happening is that our doctors trusting the algo more just makes our accuracy go up. Right, but we have to be very careful about what the real world performance is also. So we actually, the way we solve that is by doing external QA. We actually get a third party set of doctors to actually do a sample and make sure that what we are seeing is actually kosher.
Understand. Interesting. Kuldeep, do you have any examples to share?
Yeah. So I think I have a bunch of anecdotes to share, and I think model drift is the real problem, right? Specifically after you deploy it. Even when I was part of VideoCan, we had a very simple model which was classifying frames, right? Whether a given frame is slide or a demo or a code walkthrough or something like that, right? So, and that model itself was trained on millions of images. Like it was a pretty model, but it got pretty stable at millions of images trained. But you can't compete with people's creativity, right? Because people would have all kind of slides, all kind of code walkthrough, windows, and all those things, right? So it used to struggle often, right? And unfortunately, we had some way of, like, after a couple of weeks we used to dump like a random sample set and used to get it manually labeled to see how much drift is happening, right? Whether the accuracy is still in our bounds or not, all those things, right? So that was a nearly manual process. In my current company, it is in talent assessment stage, right? So we make decisions for people for companies to hire somebody or not hire. So it's a heavily regulated space. We can't live with model drift, right? So, and there are a bunch of models which runs, right, on analyzing videos, audios, English fluency skills, right? So there we have automated dashboards where we can see the data distribution, how training set versus in while set is different. Is there a feature shift there, right? And a bunch of things, and bunch of biases also, right? So a lot of time there could be an accent bias, specifically for English speaking fluency or pronunciation kind of thing, right? Somebody from South India comes, or Northeast comes, or Gujarat comes, and you will start seeing some drift, right? Which you have not taken, or there's a very less representative. So first thing, like, we need to look for that data diversity, like while even deploying the model, and then very, very actively look at for data drift. And this becomes very important in domains like talent assessment, recruitment, obviously medical, right? That Janul has talked about. So there's a very big area of interest emerging in terms of AI ops. And inside AI ops is totally model monitoring, right?
Correct.
And I hope to see more research there. Like, I think today's most of the state of the art is just visualizing it. It does not take any decision or does not even generate alerts. Even alert setting is something very customizable. So I hope to see more things there.
Interesting.
It's a very important area.
Interesting. Goda, in terms of the scale of Swiggy, I mean, do you rely more on A/B testing to judge which model is performing better versus worse, or how do you discover this problem that model is seeing a data drift and you have to retrain the AI models?
So there are two parts, right? One is the first time you build the model, how do you decide whether to go with it or not? So there a lot of experimentation does play a role for you to take a clear call. One more thing that we do is also kind of run the model in a shadow mode. We're not using the predictions of the model, but you're just running it in shadow mode to see how it's doing with respect to reality, right? But once a model is live, and now that's the gospel in some way, right? So at that point, when it starts performing badly, it often reflects in the end output metrics more than just the model metrics, because it's a highly interconnected second order effects kind of a situation in hyperlocal, right? So there we do face a lot, especially with the recent lockdowns and all coming in place. Each city is following its different pattern, and just the demand distribution itself changes. So we do face a lot of that distribution shifts. One way we kind of, or we are fortunate enough, is because across cities you have so much data that even with a couple of days or a few days of data, you're able to kind of retrain and adjust for that. But this monitoring and having enough of these safety fallbacks when your model has been completely taken off route because of these sudden distribution changes is one thing that we have kind of put in place to overcome these. Human judgment a lot of time works better in when you kind of take it off the road.
Very true, very true. I can't agree more. Given that we only have 10 minutes left, I do want to make sure that we take some questions from audience. There are two interesting questions I see. One is on hiring, and other is on this trade-off between engineering versus research. And I think both are valid to any kind of startup, right? So let me start with the first, right? So first of all, how do you find good engineers? And second is, how do you convince them to join your startups, right? I mean, I think both the questions are hard. So maybe start with Zainul first, and then I can come down to Goda. Yeah.
Sure, Vijay. Sort of the hardest problem, the hardest question to answer in some sense. But I think it's a combination of problem. What we found in our experience is that great talent gets attracted to great problems, and great talent gets attracted to great talent. Right. So if you already have, if you've got a, great founding team, you've got the chops already, you can develop that to some extent. You will find that it's a snowballing sort of effect. The second is about the problem itself. We are fortunate that we are in healthcare, and it's very high impact domain. A lot of our people have come to us because they really care about the problem, especially we are in the cardiac space. A lot of times they are personal reasons that they've come. They've had either experiences or events that have happened in their life that have really want them to contribute to this domain in some way or the other. And I think you just have to keep looking. I think the idea is, maybe one advice that I would have for founders at this point is there's no such thing as overdoing talent, even if you have to pay more for it. Right? Get at the earliest stages possible, because what will happen because of that is that you will really kick that snowballing process earlier on. If you've got a great chief data scientist in your company, or a chief algorithms officer early on even before PMF, right, where you don't even know the exact problem, but as long as they are attracted to the space, they are attracted to maybe the vision, the mission, you might be able to get them, and that's how it's worked for us, frankly.
Understand. So I mean, sorry to interrupt you there, but just a follow-up question on given that you would be able to attract a good talent early on, but there are still uncertainties in terms of which direction you would take to build a product, and it may also have a bit of rejigging effects, right? Because your product AI is going through a lot of transitions, right? So how do you manage those aspects? Because if you have got great talent, a great team, how do you manage them if the startup has to take a different course?
Yeah. You said on that one actually rings absolutely true. You have to have the mindset if you're going to come, especially in an early stage company. You have to have the mindset to be able to live with uncertainty, live with changes in direction. I think it's a matter of expectation, frankly, Vijay. And you expect that things will change because it's too early yet, and we've not had the conversations with customers. You don't know really the real problem that customers are facing. A lot of times you'll once you start talking to the customer will tell you a problem, and then when you start sitting with them and you realize, oh goodness, their problem was actually the problem they said is true, but actually the real cause is something else, right? And it might actually be easier to solve or maybe impossible to solve, right? It may be one of those two things also. So I think at especially in the early stage, it's a matter of expectation, and you should get people who may be from a from a corporate environment, and in some senses sometimes senior people feel too straitjacketed in a corporate environment and want that freedom of actually doing experimentation, and you should look for those kinds of people who are like at that stage to really come and kick off your team.
Great. So I guess it's more about what kind of vision you have for the company, what kind of vision you have for the product. It is possible that you may take two different directions. Maybe you have to check both of them and then take the third direction. But as long as you believe in that vision, as long as you have your belief in the founding team, I guess the entire org should be able to find ways to reach the goal. Well said. So maybe Goda, if you could talk about how do you perhaps solve the conundrum of finding good engineers, because I am assuming that hiring for Swiggy perhaps is not that a great issue, right? But how do you actually qualify whether the candidate is worth joining the startup or not, right? As I said, the second part in my mind in my mind is solved pretty much, right? But the first part of how do you qualify the candidate, right? Yeah.
I think what Zainul spoke about is kind of bang on there, right? And just to add to that point, in the early stage startup, you have these iterations because somewhere the cause or the mission is clear, but the how is what you're kind of figuring out, right? So if someone is motivated because I'm applying an AI model for this specific problem, then it's a mindset that might not work here. What you need is that growth mindset driven by that ultimate cause. So even with Swiggy, right, the mission is just enabling that convenience, right? Food is just one way of that convenience. So if what drives me is enabling that convenience, then anything that it takes to do that is what I will be happy doing, is the kind of growth mindset that we need to look for, so that it's a mutually satisfactory and fulfilling experience, right? In terms of hiring as well as for the employee who is joining. And it's an infinite game. You will keep figuring out newer things for that ultimate cause, but you will do what it takes along the way then.
Understand. I mean, startups and AI, I think these are two fascinating terms, coming together. No matter how much time we spend on these, the time is short. Unfortunately, we have to abide by the time rules. But I just want to have just 4-line comment from each of you on what should the prospective AI engineers look for in startups, right? Starting from Kuldeep.
Okay. So I think if you are joining a startup or planning to join as an AI engineering startup, you should look for a good problem fit. You should marry yourself to the problem and really think that this is the right problem to solve, right? So during my interview process at VideoCan, I used to on the email I used to tell people that look at our website, and then when we used to talk, I used to ask them whether they see this as a problem or not, right? And like Janul described it really well. I mean, sometimes if you have that good fit, you will carry from those ups and downs, right? That or the lack of money or lack of anything else, right? So I think that is important. Another thing is, I think specifically for AI engineer, be open to do each and everything, at least if not full stack engineering development, but at least in the full stack AI development, right? From extracting data to building a model to the model monitoring. I think be open to do these three things because that can give you a good growth. And the third, I think the last point that I would say is that you might have to compromise some short-term goals, but I think you will have a great long-term growth if you spend few years in an early stage startup or a Series A kind of startup, or even a large data heavy startup like Swiggy or ShareChat, right? I mean, that's another scale of opportunity where you are hitting SOTA levels every day, right? Because there are good problems to solve with enough data. So I would stop here.
Great.
It looks really bright for. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Goda?
I think, I would just recap, some key points that we shared today, right, as part of this. One is the role of whoever is enabling AI comes in translation of the business problem. That is key. Second, it comes with, a lot of softer aspects along with the deeper knowledge of the tools and techniques that you apply. And third is never underestimate, how difficult it is to achieve that impact out of AI, because the last leg of ensuring it's deployed, it's maintained, and it's doing what it is supposed to do is where you will end up spending 70% of the energy.
Fantastic. Yeah. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I think you both Kuldeep and Goda have covered this really well. Yeah, I think just to add to this, as Kuldeep said, this is, don't think of this as short term. AI is here to stay. Startups are here to stay. Startups are basically the emerging large organizations, and for especially for people who are just starting off on this journey, of course, you have to have the skills to do it, right? The coding skills, the math skills. Of course, you need to have the aspiration to really be in that domain. And for the longer term, I'm talking about 20 years, right? There is, I think the way we are looking at it from now, 20 years hence, we'll still be solving some AI problems, right? So we are at the beginning. So you guys are at the best times, right? You're just starting off. The industry is maturing. Hype about it in some sense that there's awareness, so it's good. From an advice point of view, what Kuldeep said, really look at the problem, really look at the company, the founder's vision behind that, and unless you love it, don't jump in, right? Don't just jump in because I want to get 1 year, 2 years of experience in building this stack. It won't work. When you really love that problem and you get married to it, as Kuldeep said, I think you will do wonders. And I think that's number one. Number two, I think the interview process I find is extremely diverse in many of these organizations. And through the interview process, you learn what the company's own data collection strategy, data processing strategy, all of that, is. And that's when you learn, hey, these guys are actually fairly mature in their thinking about this, and here's where I can contribute. I think these are the two things, when you're thinking of a company to jump into, think about both of these, and yeah, give it your best shot.
Cool. I think we are already over time, but thank you, Kuldeep, Goda, and Zainul for sharing wonderful thoughts, deep insights, out of your experiences. Thank you all the attendees for participating. Let's make AI plus startups work for India. Thank you, and take care.